Welcome back to Violent Women in Film podcast. I am so excited to introduce my guest for today's episode. Chris Easterly is a professional screenwriter and independent filmmaker. He's a graduate of the prestigious Warner Brothers Television Writers Program. He's written for Fox, Cartoon Network, NBC, Hallmark Channel, and many others. He's represented by Bauman Management in Los Angeles, is a member of the Writers Guild of America, and he teaches as an assistant professor of, or in the Media and Visual Arts program at Regent University. Chris wrote the books The Catholic Runner and Falling Forward, A Man's Memoir of Divorce, which was selected as an exclusive Amazon Kindle single. He holds a Master of Fine Arts in Screenwriting from Asbury University. In addition to writing and producing features in television, he has also written documentaries, including the acclaimed 2020 film Carl Lutz's Dangerous Diplomacy. His feature directorial debut, Devil's Hollow, was an official selection of the Soho International Film Festival and the Golden State Film Festival, and was released in May 2023. Hi, Chris. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on Violent Women in Film.
Thank you for asking me to be here. This is fun.
Oh my God. You are, so you have honored me by being my first guest for we're launching the second season. The first season was all about kind of laying the pathway. I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I just did want to start a conversation about violent women in film. And it was immediately of interest to people. I guess it's a pretty laser focused topic, and there's not a lot of conversation happening about it. As an old friend and mentor and previous professor who I continue to seek out for advice and mentorship, and then of course who I continue to follow an excellent career of, I thought it would be just such an honor to have you as my first guest on this the second season. So welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you. And I spent a little time introducing you at the beginning of the episode to our audience, but I still want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to us, and don't hold back. Be as overly patting on the back of yourself as you possibly can, so that they can just really get to know you and what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Chris Easterly. I've worked as a professional screenwriter for over 20 years in and outside of Hollywood. I grew up in Kentucky and just always wanted to make movies. And after college, I packed up my car and I moved out to Los Angeles and started working as a production assistant on shows and a background extra and doing everything I could to get on set and learn, and got my hands on scripts. And I never went to film school, but I just kind of taught myself by reading scripts, reading books about screenwriting, and then just writing a lot. I worked, kind of struggled my way in LA for several years, and took about 8 years before I finally got paid to write something. So I don't know if that's encouraging or discouraging, but that's the reality. Sometimes, it happens quicker, sometimes it takes longer, but it took that much time to work enough and meet enough people that I had contacts who would read my stuff, and also to get good enough at my craft that I was employable. And so I just wrote scripts all the time, and then got hired to write a couple things, and then after about 4 or 5 years of submitting to the Warner Brothers Television Writers Workshop, which is an annual competition for aspiring TV writers, I finally got into that program. And coming out of that program, I got staffed on a couple of TV shows, and wrote for a couple TV shows. One got canceled after like 6 seasons, but it was a great experience. 6 episodes, but it was a great experience. And then I worked on a show for the Cartoon Network, which went a season, and then wrote a Hallmark movie. And I've done a lot of rewriting scripts. Sometimes, some people will come to me they have a script and they have money to produce a movie, but they need a rewrite, and so I'll do those kind of jobs. And then I wrote and directed my first feature film which was released in May 2023 on streaming, called Devil's Hollow. It's a kind of a Southern Gothic crime drama, and that was one I had always just wanted to work on. And I remember I was in LA several years ago, and I went on some interviews for staffing for some TV shows, and I got close to getting staffed for a couple things, but it's super competitive even after you've been employed as a staff writer, and so I didn't get staffed that season. And then I remember sitting in my apartment in LA thinking, like, I could either wait for my manager to call me with, opportunities, or I'm a writer, why don't I just write something and go make it? And so I decided to write something, go back to my home state of Kentucky and shoot it there. And it took several years after that to, I wrote it, and then we shopped it around Hollywood and had some interest from some name actors and stuff, but we just didn't have the money at the time. And so I remember in 2020, during the pandemic, I just remember thinking, like, I love this story, and it's been long enough, and we have the means now to access to cinema quality cameras and people who want to work on it, and let's just go make it. And so we shot a proof of concept, like 3 scenes from the movie, and shared that with some people, and then we did a crowdfunding campaign on a site called Seed and Spark, which is like Kickstarter, but it's specifically for films and TV. And then we raised like $12,000, and so we said, okay, we got enough to go shoot 3 days. And so we went and we shot the first 3 days, and then from April to August 2021, we shot the film. So we would shoot 3 days, we would take a month break, raise more money, coordinate everybody's schedules, get back together, shoot 2 days, take a month break, and we shot like 11 days over 5 months, and finally got it all in the can. And then we went into post-production for about 6 months, and then we finished the film, and then we submitted it and went on the festival circuit and went to several festivals, which was fun. And then we teamed up with a distributor, and they released it on streaming in May of this year. So it's out there on Amazon, Vudu. I think it's on like Tubi and Plex, which I think are free, but with advertisements. So if you want to check it out, you can just go to imdb.com and type in Devil's Hollow, and it'll show you anywhere that you can see it. But that was a great experience.
I'm over here taking old-fashioned notes too, pen and paper and everything.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I got my pen. And,
yes, love it. I read that script, and then I sort of love this film because I got to be a part of, like, sitting in the sidelines, sort of watching, reading, and seeing how you brought this whole entire thing together. What you just said, that whole entire process. I remember the moment that I got to read that script and then kind of go through it all. And I've watched it several times. I just love the movie. I think it's a beautiful story. I just love it.
Thank you.
And then watching it go and get all the laurels, I just thought, how freaking amazing. I mean, and the story itself is just amazing.
Thank you. Well, it was fun to have you read it, and you were a student at the time. And then I don't know if you remember Shamika. She was in our classes, and she actually came to set and worked as a hair and makeup assistant. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so she did that for credit for her final project, and so it was fun to kind of involve all the students, and everybody could learn stuff and be a part of it.
What an amazing gift for students.
Yeah,
really.
I hope she enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people really understand the benefit of working with somebody who's worked, or maybe they do, but to be so lucky to work with people who work in the trade and who are willing to do whatever it takes to make a thing happen. Like you said, 8 years before you really, started getting paid, and you said you don't know if that is gives hope or not, but right. I think for the guy who is 7 years in, it might, what I mean?
Another thing I'll say that makes me think of is this idea of like making it in the industry, and I think that's a myth, because unless you're Steven Spielberg or Shonda Rhimes or Tom Cruise or whoever, it's a continual process, because we have this idea that we're gonna like break into the industry, make a hit film, and then it's just an unbroken spiral upward of success. But really, you can get staffed on a TV show that goes for a year or two. You're making good money. It's a hit. Then it gets canceled, and then you're out of work for a year. And then so it's on you to keep writing, to keep generating product, to promote yourself. And so like you can make it for a certain amount of time, and then you're out of work for 2 years, and then you make it again, and then you just keep going. But I think you have to just love it. It has to be your passion, and I think creators create, and so you're not going to let the sort of dry times stop you. You're just going to keep going.
Yeah, I would say even the people who make it, they never stop. They're always looking for their next job.
Yeah.
They don't have to necessarily be, but they can't stop themselves. I feel like creators are just never going to stop. They're seeking anyway. So I want to talk about your book too, and I promise the audience we are going to get into Sarah Connor. We're going to talk about the Terminator, and we're going to launch a nice, hefty, hearty conversation about violent women in film. But I do want you did just sign up with Routledge. Well, tell me about that because I don't want to tell your story. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, I submitted a book proposal about writing the short film, kind of based on my class that you took and did a great job in, and it's basically, it's a book about writing and producing short films. And so I submitted that, and it's under review right now, but it looks like they're interested in publishing it. So that should come out in like late 2024, early 2025. So that'll be fun to write. Yeah.
And you have so much stuff for it, experience for it. I'm looking forward to seeing when that hits, and I would love to be like preemptively strike and ask you to come back on the show when it does hit, so we can talk about it and see how we can use it. We'll find an angle on violent women in film and get it on here.
Yeah,
figure
sure.
It out.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll go write a short film with a violent protagonist, and then
I love it. Let's do that, and then we can use the book to talk about the script thing, and then we'll have to like produce it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to produce it. We've got a film that's coming out in 2023. It's in post. It's coming out pretty soon. There's a violent woman in it, so I may just have that violent woman on my show. Who knows?
Cool.
It's my sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get down to Sarah Connor. I know that you had binged the Terminator franchise recently. So just kind of talk to me about with the violent women in film as the driving force behind watching it. What were your initial thoughts on Sarah Connor?
Well, I think the topic of your podcast is great because you can approach it from so many different angles, like certain kinds of violence, and what does that mean? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it and there's so many fascinating characters that you can explore. And the one that just kind of always stands out to me was Sarah Connor from the Terminator, because the movie is called The Terminator, but it's really not his story. It's Sarah's story. She's the one we identify with and root for and care about. And so obviously she starts out as this like young woman in her 20s, and she's a struggling waitress and trying to find her way in life. And she's kind of lost and vulnerable. And then all of a sudden she finds out she's called upon to save the entire human race. So it's like, wow, it's a big calling. And so in the first movie, obviously, she is vulnerable and scared and she's confused, and she has the Terminator is sent from the future to kill her before she can bear her son, who is going to lead the resistance against the machines in the future and save humanity. And so then the humans send from the future a human to protect her. And so in the first movie, she's really, she needs a protector. She needs someone to watch over her and guide her through this, save her. And then spoiler alert, which is going to be throughout this whole episode, but they destroy the first Terminator, and then she accepts her mission to bear her son and save humanity. And then by the second Terminator film, the sequel, which was I think 7 years later, she has transformed into this like hardcore, muscular, brutal fighter. She's trained herself to fight against the machines, and so she's undergone this transformation. And so often people think about Sarah Connor as the one from Terminator 2, who's like the hardcore fighter, militaristic, but it's important to remember, I think, that she started as just a normal woman who like just was kind of struggling through life and didn't know what was happening. And then she receives this mission and transforms herself. And there's lots we can talk about. It's like, it's interesting because we think about like characters with agency, like a woman with agency. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, does Sarah Connor really have agency? Because it's revealed to her that she has to be the one to like bear this son and protect him and raise him until he's ready to fight against the machines. So did she have a choice to refuse that call, or?
I was just thinking about that this morning, and now the way that you just framed that, it's kind of like the Virgin Mary just popped into my mind,
That totally came to my mind too, because, there's these obvious references people have talked about, like her son who leads the resistance and saves humanity is John Connor, JC, Jesus Christ. But there really are parallels, not to get too religious, but there are parallels to the biblical story, because essentially you could compare Sarah to Mary, the mother of Jesus, because she's the one. Mary was called to, the angel came to her and said, you're going to bear this son who's going to save the world. And she didn't understand it, but she accepted it. And then she spent the rest of her life like nurturing and raising Jesus and protecting him from all these forces that wanted to destroy him, until he was ready in his 30s to start accomplishing his mission. And so really, in a sense, it's like John Connor, Sarah's son, is the savior of humanity, but really Sarah is the savior of humanity because, she was charged with watching over him until he's ready to take on the machines. So I think there are a lot of parallels, and I think that's, whether you believe in the Christian story or not, I think that's maybe one reason why the Terminator movies, the early ones at least, are so resonant with people, because we associate it, whether we know it or not, with that story.
It's so interesting too. It's kind of befitting that a woman who would be responsible for the fall of humanity would also be responsible for restoring it to helping it become saved again. So
yeah,
to bring forth the man who would do
right.
It's just that.
Yeah,
really interesting.
Yeah, you could even, not to get too crazy, but you could look at Kyle Reese, who was sent from the future to tell her what her mission is. That's the angel telling her, you're going to bear this son who's going to save the world. Yeah. And then she takes on the role. And then
he's the seed provider.
Yeah, exactly.
That. Wow. Yeah. I had sort of thought about that a little bit. So sort of the nature of this podcast is what I'm doing is I'm watching the movies and exploring the ideas, and then putting them together and then throwing them into a book that I'm writing. In that context, I will then take the information and go crazy looking for other things. And so now bringing in guests brings me this completely other angle where I can bring in conversations like this. I mean, that it sort of slightly occurred to me, and it should have occurred to me much more because obviously, as you know, the feature-length screenplay that I wrote was very heavily based in this Virgin Mary concept of a woman, being in control of doing whatever. It's all inspired by that. Maybe I'll get into that another time. But now you've just completely changed the trajectory of where I was going with the writing of this particular chapter in the book. You will drive this chapter.
Yeah, none of this, some of this stuff didn't occur to me while I was watching The Terminator. I was just enjoying a fun sci-fi action movie. But as you start really breaking it down and thinking about it, you see all these possible inspirations,
And all great stories come from that one great story, right?
Yeah.
Like that book is the fodder for the Bible is the fodder for so many incredible stories. I don't think people even know.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's so many great female characters in the Bible that save the day.
Also,
And I'm not
violent. Also, violent female characters. Like,
very.
who was the one in the Old Testament, and she like ran a stake through the dude's head? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Sorry, I should know it, but it's yeah.
Where
It's
she
an
saved.
Old Testament story where like she kills a dude like to protect people, but it's super
Yeah.
violent.
Yeah, and he thought he was safe with her,
Uh huh.
which is even cooler. Like there's so many stories like that, where like the
Yeah.
prostitute comes and saves Israel by letting them in. So many stories like that. But
Yeah.
and I know these stories pretty well, and you'd think I can identify it right now, but I'm sort of sidetracked, so I can't think of it.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you're talking about. So I'm gonna ask this question. So I sent you a list of questions, as you know, and I know that you're prepared for them. And I like to read this whole question and see what we can do with it here. So it's that what qualities make Sarah Connor such an iconic and memorable character in the world of cinema, particularly in the context of female characters in action and science fiction films? So I think we kind of just went over that in the world of like the world.
Yeah.
Biblically, again, I didn't really even consider that. But using that in this context with specifically science fiction, like, because as you know, like Ellen Ripley, and I feel like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor are in that science fiction world, but they're really completely different as similar as they are.
Yeah.
But so what do you think it's about Sarah Connor that makes her specifically uniquely suited to that?
Yeah, I think it's easy to focus on Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 as the muscle-bound, tough woman, who's capable of violence, and she's trained herself and she's prepared herself. But I think what makes her relatable is her vulnerability, like her humanity. And so it's like she's a character who, yes, has the courage to stand up to a Terminator and blast it with a shotgun or do whatever, but it's realistic too, because she can't pick up a 500-pound Terminator and throw it across the room, like she's a character who has fears. She's afraid, she has anxiety, she has questions about her future and what it means. She can be sad, she can grieve the loss of the father of her child. She has maternal instincts. Like, I think that's the stuff we can relate to, because there's a lot of violent female heroines who came after her, and we can talk about this more later. But I'm just thinking about like Lara Croft or Mia Jovovich from the Resident Evil movies, and those are all cool characters, but they're in a sense they're like superhuman, because like in the Lara Croft, the Angelina Jolie version of the Lara Croft movies in the sequel, like she punches a shark in the nose, and it's like she beats up a shark,
Right.
and it's like, well, that's fun, like it's fun to watch, but like, can we relate to that? No, but we can relate to Sarah Connor being a down on her luck waitress, not knowing where her life's going, and then being called upon to save humanity and having to rise to that challenge and save herself. So I would say one of the things that makes her compelling and resonant as a violent woman in film is that she's not just violent. She's violent for the sake of humanity. Her violence is because of her maternal instinct to save John, her son, but also to save the rest of the world. So it's not like sort of random, unmotivated violence. Like, she's doing it because she is literally trying to save the world, trying to save humanity. And she primarily commits violence against machines, not against people, which is also interesting. So she, like, if necessary, she'll hurt people who get in her way. But if you remember in Terminator 2, there's the scene where she breaks into the house of Miles Dyson, who created Skynet, which was going to create the machines which were going to bring us all down. And she's going there to assassinate him because she thinks if I kill him, he'll never build Skynet and the machines will never exist. But she struggles with shooting him because at the moment he doesn't know what his creation is going to bring about. And so she struggles with the question of, is it justified to kill him? Because in a sense, he's innocent right now, even though. So it's kind of like the question of if we could go back and, murder the person who created the atomic bomb, would we do it?
Yeah.
Would that be fair? Would it be just? Would it be moral? And she's standing there in his living room with his wife and kids, and they're pleading with her not to hurt him. And she really struggles with, do I kill this human? So I just think that's interesting. In terms of violence, she's seeing violence as a justification for saving humanity, but she's also struggling with, can I kill this man who doesn't even know what he's created, So I think that's an interesting scene, sort of a pivotal scene for Sarah in terms of... I also
feel like that may be portrayed uniquely with women. I don't know, I can't even think of any... And maybe there's plenty, but at the moment I cannot drum up any memory where, it's between this guy and the rest of the world, and the man is the hero. Is there the pause or I can't kill him?
Right.
I'm sure there is, but it's because it's a woman in this context. It seems to be it tells a different story altogether.
Do you think that's, I'm just thinking out loud, like because of maybe an internal maternal instinct to not destroy life, or what do you think? I think
so. I think that at the very least it's probably written that way. I mean, she runs away from the Terminator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger original The Terminator, when he gets off that elevator at the institution, right? I mean, she's a badass, and then she's like going to and then he comes off that elevator, and it's like, I mean, it shakes her whole universe. Now we've got this. We watch her be calculating, cold, sort of sinister, even up until this point, almost wicked. She has gone from what you mentioned in the first film as being innocent, fun, just kind of wants to get a boyfriend. Things are her life. She's a waitress. Into this person who has clearly lost quite a bit of her marbles, or at least she's being portrayed that way.
Yeah.
And she's got this grown son who's 13 years old, and she's in a mental institution. She is keeping herself fit, but she does something she does a few sinister things up until this point. It doesn't really hurt anybody necessarily. But then, and so you almost convinced that she has turned into the woman that everybody's always, thinks of as this badass. But then he gets off that elevator.
And she's terrified.
Yeah. And all that humanity comes back to her. So again, when you look at that and you think, if Sarah Connor was Stanley Connor or whatever, is that guy running away? And that there's a lot of gender conversation that can actually happen with this.
That's an interesting point, because we could go into a whole nother episode, but when she sees Arnold Schwarzenegger step off, when that elevator opens and she sees him, also what's happening is she's recalling all of this previous trauma from her experience with him. And so she wouldn't be scared if he hadn't chased her down in the first movie.
Right.
But all of a sudden, all this trauma comes back, and she's like, oh my gosh, this thing is here to kill me. Right. And so she's obviously traumatized and horrified.
And it's so good. I mean, if it had gone any other way, I think we wouldn't have believed in the moment.
Well, that's also kind of what I was saying about they're two different movies, so it's hard to compare them. But it was like if that was Lara Croft and the cyborg showed up, she probably would not have hesitated. She would have just started punching and kicking it and shooting it. But Sarah is a real person who has previous traumatic experiences with this cyborg and she is scared. And so again, I think that's what makes us relate to her. You know, she's not a fearless, indestructible soldier. She's still a person.
Yeah. You know, and that brings me to, so a lot of the research that I'm doing, and you know, my obsession is the power of film and media and the effects of it on American society. And most importantly, I think, is how we can use or not use film and media to make change in society. And so the question of, when we watch a film with a violent woman in it, what is the effect of children seeing that, or anyone seeing that, and how that affects society? So how do our actions changed or inspired or motivated by the things that we watch, and then how does that affect society, specifically about women? And so when we look at Sarah Connor against Laura Croft, as you've mentioned a couple times, which I think is a really good comparison, in that one is reality. We can identify with it because we can see ourselves in that absolute reality, whereas the other one, we can see ourselves in that as the superhero, right? But just like the possibility of that happening is very minimal, even under the circumstances. But
Right.
with Sarah, we can see that. And so when we're talking about being influenced or inspired by actions by a violent woman in film, when it comes to Sarah Connor, what are your thoughts on the possibility that it would inspire women or has probably even, in a beneficial way or in a negative way?
Mm-hmm.
And let me know if you need me to rephrase that question. I do this quite a bit with my students, right? Ask a question, they go,
Mm-hmm.
huh?
Yeah. I guess again, getting back to the sort of believability and reality thing of it, like, I think it would be dangerous to depict a scenario in which you say, oh, this 120-pound woman can take on a 500-pound cyborg, you know? But at the same time, Sarah Connor has grit, she has determination, she has a reason for why she's fighting. Like, I think those are all things that could be inspirational, like, to me, to a man or a woman. But I think, yeah, the realism thing, it's like when I was a kid, I watched Rambo, you know, and he like jumps out of a tree, you know, and falls down a mountain, and he survives it. And so then I went out and I tried that, and then it broke my arm, you know. And so I was like, probably, like, I can be inspired by Rambo, but I probably shouldn't do that. But maybe I could be inspired by Rambo's like bravery and his willingness to like fight for the good, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, in a sense, like, I guess you could say Sarah Connor is like a role model in that she's willing to fight, but also she's vulnerable. And that gets us more invested as an audience. Like, there's more at stake. Like, we believe she could get hurt. I think that's another reason why Die Hard is such a great action film, is Bruce Willis just looked like a normal sort of average guy. He wasn't muscle-bound Schwarzenegger, Stallone. He was like, we could picture, like, any sort of dude could picture himself, oh, if I was in that situation, like, we believed, like, he might actually get hurt. And then, so we sort of related to him more for that.
Yep.
And I think the same could probably be said of, like, Sarah Connor, you know?
Oh, the walking on the glass.
Yeah, exactly. That was a great scene.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So another thing that I have this conversation with these students. So I went ahead and launched into the third Terminator, and there was something I found distinctly different at the beginning of that one. And the most notable one is that rather than it being a male from the future, it is a woman.
Yep.
And this woman goes and, she takes the car from another woman. And then when she gets pulled over, and I don't know if you've seen it lately or
Yeah.
what,
I
but
know what you're talking about when she sees the billboard.
yes,
Yeah.
she gets pulled over by the cop, and the thing that we see happen is that the camera goes tight on her breasts, and they grow. She grows her breasts.
Yep.
And there's just so much we can talk about with that.
Right.
So much. But one of the things that when I have these discussions with my students about violent women in film specifically is that they say what they notice more than anything is that violent women in film are portrayed as sex objects or sex symbols, or they're very sexy.
Yeah.
And until that moment in the Terminator franchise, the first three anyway, I did not see that with Sarah Connor. I did not see sexy.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point, because I was reading some articles about the making of the first two Terminators, and somebody pointed out that James Cameron, the director, his camera totally objectifies Arnold Schwarzenegger's naked body from head to toe, literally. Just dwells on it,
Yeah.
But he never does that with Sarah Connor.
That's true.
Yeah. And which, Schwarzenegger was probably like, hey man, I worked for this body. Yeah, show it off, But like, it's interesting that he objectifies the male's body, but not Sarah Connor. Like, the camera seems to respect her.
Yeah.
But then you get to T3, like you said, with the TX model, and she uses, the sort of sexuality to her advantage. Yeah, which is an interesting scene when she swells her breasts, and again, you could have a whole nother episode on that probably, but
Yeah, truly.
But that's interesting too, because she technically, could you call her a violent woman in film? Because she's not really a woman; she's a cyborg, but she's taken on the form of a woman. But I would also say I liked Terminator 3. I thought it was a fun movie. I thought it was well done, but I also felt like it suffered from a lack of Sarah Connor.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, she was present in kind of like in the ether, but like the fact that she wasn't there, it didn't feel as substantial as the previous two films.
No, it felt like, we saw the dramatic change in technology from the first to the second, and then they kind of were like, well, with or without her, we have more technology to work with. We have to. It would be crazy not to. I did find it interesting as I was watching them, even in the light of AI. So, just mentioning AI, so it's like everything exploded with technology. And then that felt like, even your phones, they'd be like, the brand new iPhone is going to have a better camera, but does it? No, it doesn't really. It's been 5 years of not a new camera, but now we have AI, and it's suddenly like, I don't know if you've looked into it outside of like the writing and film world at all, but they're doing things with AI, like they're using it to talk to dolphins, right? So they're learning languages from other animals. It's wild, unbelievable, interesting stuff, and it's almost like creepy that this is happening. And you watch these films, and I know I'm diverting from the violent woman in film thing, but I can't help it with how exciting things are right now. That as I'm watching these films and looking at the world that we are living in and creating, it's like we wrote it already, and it's happening. So it's like, anyway, I know I'm crazy, and that's how that looks, but I really can see the moment where I feel like I'm going to be asked to be Sarah Connor, potentially,
Right.
Fight the robots that come back our way.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. As an experiment, I submitted the log line for my movie Devil's Hollow to an AI story generator because I wanted to see what it would come up with.
Yeah.
And so I submitted the log line, and like a minute later, it came up with a synopsis for a movie, and it was actually like kind of a compelling synopsis, but it was not at all like the movie I had written.
Wow.
And it misunderstood certain character moments and nuances. And so it made me realize, like, yeah, first of all, AI can only take what you feed it. If you don't give it stuff, it can't work with it. But AI can take my log line and come up with a story, but it never knew what it was like for me to play in the creek on my grandfather's farm, or to have my first kiss, or to, and so unless you tell it those things, it can't recreate it. And it's interesting, the idea of self-awareness, because in Terminator, they talk about the machines became self-aware. But it raises the question for me, like, AI is not a person, so if there's no self there, can it become self-aware?
Right.
I don't know. We're getting into a whole other thing, but it's like, I think James Cameron was very prescient years ago in anticipating these things. Like you're saying, you're like, I feel like I'm going to have to be Sarah Connor now,
And now I feel inspired, like I can do that.
Just looking at my notes, we talked about T1, T2, T3. Then there was Terminator Salvation, which was the story of what happens in the future, and Sarah Connor's already gone, and so it follows John Connor. And there were some strong female characters in that movie, but again, I felt like it suffered from a lack of Sarah Connor. Mm-hmm. And then by Terminator Genesis, mm-hmm. they kind of rebooted the whole timeline, and Sarah Connor was in it, played by Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones. But they gave her a backstory where when she was a child, the Terminator was sent to her as a protector, and it raised her and kind of became like a father figure, which is an interesting idea, but that, for me, took away a little from the power of Sarah Connor. Because she had a male cyborg protector her whole life.
Love it.
Whereas in the first two movies, she didn't need that. So I think that's one reason why Terminator Genesis didn't feel like it worked as much. And then the last movie that came out was Terminator Dark Fate, where, again, they rebooted the timeline. It's supposed to take place after T2. And Linda Hamilton came back. And in that one, they kill John Connor right away in the movie, and then she becomes like a Terminator hunter, and she's trying to track them all down, and then she gets a new girl, a young girl who she has to save, who's going to take over, who's going to fight the machines. And there was a character, like a machine-human hybrid, who was a female in that. So that was a good portrayal of like a violent woman fighting the machines for a good reason. But I just don't think they had the resonance of the first two movies, like, because when you start messing with the mythology, and sort of the like the initial inspiration of it all, it's not as powerful. I don't know. That might not be totally on topic, but
no, I think it is. I think it is, because one of the things, Chris, that you just said, so the way that the Terminator in the first one finds them again is that they're at the hotel. She calls her mother. Mm-hmm. And it's clear, it's evident to me that maybe she was raised by a single mother. Like in that one conversation with her mom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so they never mentioned her father, right? Yeah.
Yeah, never mentioned a father. And so for them to go back and be like, oh, she was raised by a man, it's just, that doesn't follow.
Yeah, it starts to dilute the power of it all.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because I think, I told you this before, but I started watching the TV series Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Yeah.
Which I had seen it years ago, and then I started watching it again. And to me, that's a really good show. Like it's actually better than most of the sequels. And I think
I got to add that, because I meant to add that and I hadn't watched it, so now I get to add it as part of my book.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's great because it's a TV series, so you have multiple episodes to dive deeper into Sarah Connor's character and her psychology and her motivations, and so you can really go deep into that. And it's just really well done. And there's a female Terminator in that who is sent back to assist them to protect her and John. And then Sarah, there's a great line which I think encapsulates the power of the Sarah Connor character, because to me, part of the power is, again, that she's maternal, but she's violent, but she maintains the tension between the two. She's not just maternal and weak or vulnerable. She's not just violent and overpowering. Like, she's the tension between those things. She's always holding that tension. And in the first episode of the Sarah Connor Chronicles TV show, she's talking to her son, John Connor, and they have to leave town because she thinks the Terminators have found them again. And so she's talking to him, and she says, you know, get ready. She's like, grab the bag, bring all the guns, I'll make pancakes. I thought that was an amazing line, like, to encapsulate who she is as a mother and a warrior, you know?
Yeah. And to me, that is like, that should be the motto of any well-developed violent woman in film, because it maintains the femininity.
Right.
That must be there if we're to have a connection.
Right. Like, again, I think, like, Lara Croft, she's fun, but she's not going to make you pancakes. She's going to kick your ass. Whereas, like...
Punch you in the nose.
Right. Whereas Sarah's like, no, I'm a mom, too.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so in the last one where they bring Linda Hamilton back, I found Sarah Connor in that, and it's, I guess, you know, we have growth and it makes sense, but I found her to be so vile. She was just...
Like bitter or...
Yeah, like bitter, angry. Every other word out of her mouth was the F word.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I lost a lot. I love a development of character who travels this life and becomes grittier. You know, I didn't mind where they thought they were going with her, but I thought she's hard to listen to talk. It's like you'd think she'd become wiser and still angry, but has this golden, I don't know. I felt like they didn't do her justice with where they took her.
I can see that. And that raises an interesting question for me. I want to ask you. I wrote this down. Hypothetical. What would Sarah Connor have done after the war with the machines was over? Like, in the series, they had her die of cancer, so she never gets to live to see John Connor fight the machines and defeat them. But if she had been alive, would she have helped rebuild civilization, or would she have been too far gone, like too scarred? Like, what toll would all that violence, even for a just cause, have taken on her? Like, if you imagined a movie where they beat the machines, Sarah Connor's an older woman, what does she do now?
Yeah.
Because her whole life has been defined by violence. Mm-hmm. Like, for the cause of saving humanity. But she's still been driven by violence her whole life. So what happens when the war's over?
Yeah. That's such a good question.
Maybe you and me should write that.
That's a great idea. You know, I'm pining to co-write something with you.
We'll work
and
on
now that I know that, you know, now that I know there's a potential, I should contact you on the side and find out how much I can pay you to just do rewrites on all my scripts that I've already written. Let's get them made.
You can give me a sandwich.
Yeah, that's good.
No, we'll talk about it.
That's good. I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, I love the idea of her becoming, you know, training women to become fighters, you know, to learn how to protect their babies who might be the future investment of the universe or whatever. And then on the other hand, I like her becoming the wise old woman who they come to learn, you know, to learn.
Right.
I don't know. That would be fun to write, though.
Yeah.
For sure.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so do you have anything else?
I have a couple more thoughts, if it's okay.
Yeah, bring it.
It's interesting as we're talking about it. Just looking at my notes. So we talked about the female Terminators and the TX swelling her breasts, and I was on a Reddit discussion about Sarah Connor. It was about strong female characters like Ripley, Sarah Connor, and one person pointed out, they said, can it really be considered a strong female character if it's just, quote, male tropes with boobs? So I thought that was interesting, because that is, it's like, I've read before that the Ripley character was originally written as a male, and then they cast Sigourney Weaver. So yeah, it's like, I mean, that's what your podcast is about. It's like thinking about these questions, like who, like, if it's just a male tropes of violence with boobs, is that really a complex, interesting female character? I don't know.
And I don't know if you remember my thesis. And I mean, that's another thing, is I'm kind of expanding on that concept of violent women or vigilante women being portrayed in film as just stronger men, like men who are stronger men, not women who are stronger women.
Right.
With all the women traits or woman traits, but that they're stronger men. And I think with Sarah Connor, in Sarah Connor's case, she's all woman, as you've mentioned. I mean, as I think you've been saying all along. Ellen Ripley, on the other hand, I think it's not until you see her maternal instincts coming out with the child that you can make the case that she's not a male, trope with boobs.
Right. Which is interesting because Ridley Scott directed the first Alien, and then James Cameron directed the sequel, and that falls in a long line of James Cameron female characters like Ripley, Sarah Connor, Rose in Titanic, Neytiri in Avatar, who saves the male character. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you'd have to get James Cameron to talk about that, but it's interesting that he gravitates towards those strong female characters. And Aliens is great because it's like the alien is driven by maternal instinct. She's pissed off because they're killing her babies, and then Ripley is driven by maternal instinct because she wants to protect Newt. And so then it's like the clash of these two mothers, Now
I need to write it. I think it's almost like I need to write an entire chapter just on Cameron. And see why he's driven by those stories.
Yeah, I think you could. That also brings up another thought I wanted to mention is like, one of your questions was like the effect or the impact that Sarah Connor has had on strong female characters in American culture. And it occurs to me that like, so Sarah Connor appears in 1984 in the Terminator movie, and she's becomes this badass warrior woman. And then 35 years later, Linda Hamilton comes back in Terminator Dark Fate. But by then, we've had 3 decades of women characters inspired by Sarah Connor. Mm-hmm. So it was like in 1984, you had Ripley before that. But in 1984, Sarah Connor seemed to be like a sort of fresh, unique concept of like this tough, violent female woman who could, who was maternal and all that. And then you get 3 decades of, Lara Croft, Resident Evil, all these other characters. So by the time Linda Hamilton shows back up again in 2019 or whatever it was, it seems like it wasn't as revolutionary.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. So, and maybe that's the other thing that kind of rubbed me in the wrong way, because Sarah Connor's like the mother of violent women in film. Because as you mentioned, Ellen Ripley prior to that, she was not maternal yet. We didn't see that yet, right? Because Aliens was 1980.
Yeah, and I think
if I just did an episode on that, you'd think my dates would still be in my brain.
Yeah, I think because Alien was what, like 79?
79.
And then, I think you're right. I think Aliens came out after Terminator.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did. Oh, I just did an episode on that. And you'd think, I just don't have dates anymore in my brain. I don't know what to tell myself.
I lose track too. I'm just like, I remember this movie.
Was that before or after?
Right.
It's too much stuff in my brain. But at any rate, so you've got this, she's the mom. She's the first one in that way. But then the lasting impression we have of Sarah Connor as portrayed by Linda Hamilton is this sour, angry, vile person who doesn't seem to have grown. Because to me, it's somebody, when people grow, they might have a bigger chip on their shoulder. They might have more, there might be a lot more anger in them. You know, things happen to people. And in her case, a lot of horrible things, right? She saved the world. And so for her to be that angry, it seems like, I don't know, it didn't feel like, I feel like when we grow into wiser,
right,
more whimsical, maybe, happier, maybe, but certainly not vile. And maybe
right.
they do. It just didn't seem fair. I feel like they did her in a great injustice.
Yeah, I think that's why Terminator 2 feels like the sort of perfect conclusion of the story.
Yeah.
But then they pick it back up in Terminator Dark Fate, and then her son gets killed like in the first 10 minutes. So you could argue that like she's bitter and vile because she's angry about, she's grieving the murder of her son, but it seems like, yeah, they already saved the world in T2, so why did they have to come back for T6? You know, like, unless, because they just wanted to make money, I guess, but it did not do any favors to the character, like you said. Speaking of like women who have been inspired by Sarah Connor, like strong, violent female characters, another two that come to mind are Michonne and Carol from The Walking Dead. And Michonne is this great, you know, they were in the comics, and then they show up in the show, but Michonne's this like, you know, kick-ass, you know, sword-wielding woman who slays zombies, and she's self-sufficient and strong, and yet she's also human and vulnerable, and she needs love. And then there's Carol, who in the first season of the show was abused by her husband, and then she becomes, throughout the course of the show, this like independent, violent, strong warrior, fighting the zombies and other humans who are resisting them. And there's an amazing episode, I think. Did you ever watch The Walking Dead?
Obsessively twice.
There's that great episode, I think it's season 4, and Carol is watching over Lizzie, who's the little 10-year-old-ish girl. And Carol realizes that Lizzie's actually like mentally ill, and she's a threat to the community, and she is about to kill her own little baby sister. And Carol has to decide, she feels like she has to protect Lizzie, but if she doesn't get rid of Lizzie, Lizzie's going to hurt the rest of them. And so there's that amazing scene where they go out in the garden, and she has to kill this little girl. And so Carol has to commit this act of violence against this little girl. And she just tells her, look at the flowers. Don't look at me. Look at the flowers. And the little girl's like, I'm sorry, did I make you mad? You know? And Carol realizes, if I don't murder this child, it's going to kill the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And so Carol shoots her in the back of the head. And like, I remember watching that the first time, and I was like, what? Did they just do that? Like, and, but it's a great example to think about of a violent woman in film. Carol, who like Sarah Connor, is doing this for the benefit of the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
But she has to kill this little 10-year-old girl.
Do you think that if a woman hasn't experienced motherhood, how could you do that? How could you do the same thing, kind of reserving that feminine quality, which kind of takes that all the way, is when a woman becomes a mother. It like completes that part of a female animal cycle. I don't know. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. But how could you do that without with a woman who hasn't? Is a maternal instinct always the case? Is that
right? Yeah, it's an interesting question, because obviously, like, I think it's wired into our humanity that men and women are different. There's similarities, you know, there's exceptions, but men have a maternal instinct, and I think women can have a paternal instinct, what's traditionally conceived as paternal or maternal. So if a woman commits an act of violence to protect her offspring, does that make her like a man? No, it just means she's a woman, but she's doing what she needs to protect her kid. We just associate violence primarily with men. But if a man, like in Kramer versus Kramer, is struggling to make waffles for his kid, you know, does that make him like a woman? No, he's a man still. Like, he's just trying to like take care of his kid. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Like my mom, I was raised by a single mom, and she could make me cinnamon toast, but then she could also like pull out the belt and whip me if I like snuck out at night.
Right.
I don't know. So yeah, and
Um,
I've seen my mom, like if she thought that me or my brother were threatened by somebody, like she'd get like super redneck on them, from Kentucky, and like yell at them and threaten them, and but then she would also, wrap us up at night and tuck us into the bed, and so
right. I see. I mean, I certainly have all of that as a mother
yeah.
myself.
But was your question like if you don't have a child, do you still have that instinct? Is
Yeah.
that
So I guess that I'm struggling to formulate the question very well. If I wanted to write a woman that is so Sarah Connor in the way that she has in all of the feminine qualities and all that human quality and the ability to mix the violence with the fear and the vulnerability without any and remove all mother anything related to mothering, maternal instincts,
right?
protection of something that you're responsible for, how would you write that?
Right.
What would you?
Yeah. I think again, not to keep picking on Lara Croft, but I think that's when you get Lara Croft.
Yeah,
I don't think she has kids. Like she's just
no,
a badass, which is fine. And then there's women who don't want to have children, and that's their prerogative. And like everybody's different. So I think it would depend on the unique character, I guess.
it reminds me of actually Gretel. Have you seen Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters? Witch.
No, I know what you're talking about. I haven't seen it though.
There's something about it. She's not a mom, but she had a mom, and she was a kid, and they're protecting kids. And so there's something about it. Maybe it's something about our nature and our need to procreate in order to survive, like for the survival of the species,
Yeah,
is always going to be the case in both men and women.
which I think brings it right back to Sarah Connor. I think that's
Yeah.
why she's so resonant. Whether an individual person wants kids or not, we all relate to that sort of universal thing that's wired into us by God, I believe, to protect the young. It was like, I don't have kids, but I remember my wife and I were driving last night back from dinner, and there was it was like at night, it was dark, it was 11 p.m., and there was like two or three little boys on bicycles out in the 7-Eleven parking lot, like riding around. And I was like, what are those kids doing out there? Where are their parents? I was like, wait, they need to get back home. And I'm like, I'm not their dad, but like that was my instinct, was like, what are those kids doing out there alone?
Yeah,
Like I wanted to
sure.
protect them.
Yeah.
So
Does violent women in film affect society in a benefit or in a positive or negative way?
right. Okay. I guess my initial thought is like both. Violent women in film, just like violent men in film, can be irresponsible and unrealistic, but also realistic and inspirational and encouraging and enlightening. And it really depends on each individual character. There's been plenty of movies made with like awesome, hardcore, strong females killing and beating people up and saving the day, but they didn't resonate with us as characters. And then there's Sarah Connor, who does.
Yeah.
So
And so in Sarah Connor's case, probably.
yeah,
Probably good. Or
yeah.
you say yes.
I say yes in Sarah
Yeah.
Connor's case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although you make a good point that by the time they revisit it 35 years later, it's changed a little. So I would say violent women in film regarding Sarah Connor is a positive thing, at least through the first 2 Terminator movies and the TV series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Yeah. Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I have had an amazing, I've loved sitting here with you and talking. This is a Saturday afternoon that I could probably do every Saturday for real.
Me too.
Tell us where, so tell me, just remind our audience where we can find you now that we got to know you a little bit better. Where can we find you? Where can we hunt down your movies? Where can we watch you, read you, find you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. If you just, look up Chris Easterly and maybe we have some mutual friends, it'll be me. But I'm not really on Twitter or Instagram or anything. So Facebook, I have a LinkedIn page. You can find me on there. The movie that I wrote and directed, Devil's Hollow, is available now on Amazon, Vudu, Tubi, Plex, Hoopla, I think is one of them. So you can find that. And there's also a devilshollowmovie.com website if you wanted to find out more about that. So you can check that out. And then I'm currently working on a short film that I wrote that I'm going to shoot in Kentucky in December, like a 6-page script, 1-day shoot. And it's about an African man who pulls into an old rural gas station and he's seeking directions to the airport to try to get home. And he goes into the gas station for help, and the African man only speaks French, and the sort of good old boy gas station attendant speaks in such a thick Southern accent that they both require subtitles to be understood. And so it's kind of a fun play with subtitles and communication and our common humanity. So I'm actually raising money for that right now, and we have a little Indiegogo campaign that's ending in a few days, and just trying to raise the funds for that to shoot that little film, and then we'll release it to festivals and online and stuff. So that's my next project. And then I have a couple features that I'm also in various stages of trying to get off the ground and casting and produce and stuff. So I always like to have more than one project at a time, because you never know when one's going to hit, and if you get sick of one, you can focus on the other. So
yeah, that's a good strategy.
Yeah.
I will be sure to put links to all of the things that you just mentioned so that our audience can find you if they want to find you. And of course, I think people in the film world, it's small, believe it or not. Now, maybe they want to support you, which I strongly recommend. And thank you, Chris. You and Sarah Connors in the world are what make the world such a beautiful place.
Same to you. Yeah, thank you for asking me to do this. This was fun. So yeah, it's a great podcast, and just fascinating to explore. And like you said, as I was thinking about Sarah Connor and we were talking through this, I was like, yeah, you could do 3-hour episodes, or you could do multiple episodes, like so many directions you can go. But that's what's so fun about thinking about and exploring topics like this.
Yeah, I'll be back at you, hopefully.
Okay.
And we may spend hours. We may.
Yeah, who are we talking about next week?
Right?
Laura Croft. All right,
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, bye.
Let us know what you thought in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with someone who loves film, and hit the bell to be notified if you want to know when the next episode comes out.